Howdy, folks. Welcome to the October edition of Cattle Trails Showcase. I'm Ron Wilson, Poet Laureate. I'm glad to be your host. Saddle up. We're getting ready to zoom to South Texas. As we've done in recent months, we're opening our program with a Western trivia question. We invite you to type your answer in the chat. So you can go to the chat where you'll be able to post questions to our speaker later. So here's the question. Last month, we asked you to name the Lone Ranger's partner, his character in the shows, and you knew that that was Tonto. And the question this month is very much more difficult, and that is, what was the name of Tonto's horse? Not the Lone Ranger's horse, but Tonto's horse. And if you know that answer, feel free to enter that in the chat. The purpose of the Cattle Trails Showcase is to continually highlight the communities, museums, attractions, historical elements, and other components along the Chisholm or the Western Trail. The showcase is brought to you by the International Chisholm Trail Association, of which Dennis Katzenmeyer is president, Michael Grauer is vice president, Nancy Lawrence is secretary, and Mary Lou Rivers is treasurer. We have two very exciting announcements for you today. And the first exciting announcement is that the annual Chisholm Trail Conference is 1 week from today. Next Friday, October 15th, it will be in hybrid format. So those who can be in person will be at the Old Cowtown Visitor Center in the historic Delano district of Wichita. And there's also a Zoom option. So it's possible for you to participate by Zoom. And we encourage you to go online to www.chisholmtrailassn.com and follow the links to register. Our second exciting announcement is on the legislative front. On Wednesday, the U.S. Senate National Parks Subcommittee held a hearing on a number of bills, one of which was the legislation that would designate the Chisholm and Western Trails as National Historic Trails. And at that hearing, the U.S. Department of Interior testified that they would support that legislation with some as yet unnamed technical amendments. So we're very pleased with that statement, and it's one step in a very, very long process, but it is a step forward. And so we're pleased by that. And we'll be talking about that more at the annual conference next Friday. With that, we'll turn to our speaker, to Cuero, Texas, to the Chisholm Trail Heritage Museum. And we invite everyone who is not a speaker to mute your microphones, if you would. Our speaker is Bryan Gonzalez, who is the education consultant and artifact manager at the museum, a native of San Antonio. He studied at Montana State and was a history teacher before entering museum work. He's active with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Buffalo Soldiers program, I understand. And one other thing you need to know about Bryan, he and his wife had a new baby girl a few weeks ago. So I'm not sure he's had a lot of sleep, but we're pleased that he is with us today. So with that, we welcome Bryan Gonzalez from the Chisholm Trail Heritage Museum. Bryan?
Well, thank you so much, Ron, for that wonderful introduction. I greatly appreciate it. And I just want to say thank you so much for inviting us, letting us speak to you about our museum down here in Cuero. A big howdy from Cuero. And more importantly, what we do to help keep the legacy and the history of the Chisholm Trail alive. As Ron said, I have a new baby girl, so I got a decent amount of sleep last night, so I'm ready to do this. And today's going to look a bit different because I have a new baby girl. I wasn't sure I'd be able to do the presentation. So I'm going to give an introduction, and then I have a video that I filmed beforehand that I'll be playing, which what we do is we are going to go on a tour of the museum. So you'll be able to see everything. We have a fairly large campus. And so that way you'd be able to see most of the buildings in our collection and really the highlights of what we do. Just as a brief introduction to the Chisholm Trail Heritage Museum, Cuero is a wonderful town. It means rawhide in Spanish. And Cuero was one of the starting points for the feeder trails that led into the Chisholm Trail. We had one of the first cattle drives head out from Cuero in 1866. And the genesis of this museum really comes from a love within the community of preserving our history. Back in 1994, two individuals in the town, one by the name of Anne Friar Thomas and the other William Bill Blackwell, met. And Friar Thomas came with the idea of, let's try to build an agricultural museum. And that took some time to sort of gestate and become the idea of what became the Chisholm Trail Heritage Museum. We officially began our start in 2000. So 2020 was our 20th anniversary, where the first board was elected. They came together, and they took the time and the dedication and effort to build the collection, to build fundraising, to be able to purchase the building that we're in, which we'll go into detail in the video. And then we were finally able to open our doors in 2013. And since then, we have been bringing the history of the trail alive. And today we're going to be able to bring that with you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. And I have a video all ready to go.
What we have behind me is the Edward Tinker collection. And this collection shows just how far Spanish influence spread throughout the Americas in the cowboys of the Americas. So what we have on display, Edward Tinker was a lawyer who traveled up and down Latin America, collecting the artifacts and the tools of the trade for the various cowboys. Everyone from the Chilean Huaso, the Argentine Uruguayan Gaucho, the Venezuelan Colombian Llaneros, and what's most important for our story, the Mexican Vaqueros. And while these cowboys all have different names, they all use similar tools, have some manner of similar dress. Most importantly, work with cattle and horses. And behind me, these artifacts represent all these different people coming together and how these groups really adapted the way of the cowboy. And so what we see is the transmission of culture. When the Spanish came over, not only were they bringing their own traditions, they were also bringing traditions from North Africa. We have to remember Spain had been ruled for several hundred years by the Moors, the inhabitants of modern North Africa, and eventually they were kicked out of what's known as the Reconquista. And the Reconquista actually ended in 1492, the same year Columbus came over to the Americas. But they didn't always kick out the ideas. Some of those included the saddle system, what we know as the hackamore, the use of the large spurs, the espuela grande, and we see that being transferred to the Americas and then being reinvented in the Americas, wherever the Spanish ended up. So behind me, you can see some of the items. We have a large collection of those giant brow spurs, the espuela grandes. We have the various sombreros, the hats, and many different styles of saddles and stirrups that might look a little different than what we see today, but at the core are all built for one path. As the Spanish continued to colonize the region they called New Spain, what is modern day Mexico and Texas, we see as the cultures coming in and they continue to blend. And one of the big things we see is the blending of the Spanish with the American traditions and what is now known as the mestizo culture. We see what we call this as syncretism, two cultures coming together, melding, and creating something new. That is something that is truly American, coming together, creating something. And that ends up creating the American cowboy, a true icon of the American idea. But to get to that, we first have to understand the roots of the American cowboy. And most important to this story is that of the Mexican vaquero. When the first cattle were brought into Texas, were brought over with the mission system, it was mestizo cowboys, the workers, the ranchers, the vaqueros of the missions were herding these cattle and initially taking care of them. As other immigrant groups began to arrive in Texas, namely those from other parts of Europe and the United States, and settled in what was originally Spanish Texas, then Mexican Texas, the cultures would come together and they would trade cattle ranching concepts and ideas. But many of the major ideas we associate with modern cowboy come from Mexican vaquero. The use of the lariat, the lasso, the use of the wide-brimmed hat, the sombrero, and some of them, and the use of the spurs and the hackamore style saddle. Some ideas didn't come from them. Instead, they were brought over by other European groups. One of the big ones is the use of the whip and the use of cattle herding dogs. And here at the Chisholm Trail Heritage Museum, we try to show how these cultures blended together. More importantly, the syncretism that created the American cowboy. Behind you, you can see the European cracker style system of using the whip and the dog, while also the mestizo, the vaquero system. And we see the cowboy gradually shift from being pure vaquero, as they would have been in the initial days, of when the sword was the main sidearm of the cowboy, to the American cowboy we see today, the sword being replaced by the 6-shooter. We're going to head into our main part of our exhibit. We're going to continue to learn more about how the traditions changed over time and how really a lot of them have stayed the same throughout the century. Behind me is one of the centerpieces of our collection, and that is our chuck wagon display. In this hall, guests to the museum begin to truly learn the history of the Chisholm Trail, how it came to be, and more importantly, the role it played both for the state of Texas and for the nation. Many of you know the Chisholm Trail came about because of the Civil War, and we here at the Chisholm Trail Heritage Museum really focus on the time period that the Chisholm Trail takes place, the era known as Reconstruction. This is a time of massive upheaval in the nation. We're seeing true divergence in the economics of the nation, both at the macro level and the micro level. And that is especially true for the people of Texas. Texas wasn't as ravaged as much as the rest of the South during the Civil War, but it is still reeling from the defeat of the Civil War and the economic fallout. Cattle prices plunged to incredibly low levels. Had to head north to sell their cattle to be able to reach those markets and get those prices for the higher prices for their head of cattle. And as I always ask students, how do you get your cattle up north? Younger ones tend to say, oh, why didn't they take a boat or a plane? We explain why not, and that the trail system was one of the best ones to get to the railheads that were located in Kansas and Missouri. One of the first cattle drives actually took off from DeWitt County. Major individual in DeWitt's history was Crockett Caldwell. He set off on one of the first trail drives in 1866 from here to St. Joseph, Missouri. And he would have used the chuck wagon, much like one you see behind me. And this helps bring to life what the perils and the trials and tribulations faced by the cowboys as they headed up the trail, while also providing an in-depth view of the history of why they needed to make this trip. And more importantly, what awaited them as they headed up the trail. Not only is the Chisholm Trail Heritage Museum concerned with preserving the history of those who made the trips on the trail and the stories of the traditional cowboys, we're also deeply invested in preserving the history of the forgotten cowboys or the less well-known cowboys, and also those who they interacted with. Remember, as they were heading up the trails, they were passing through what was then Indian Territory, what is modern-day Oklahoma, and they were encountering the initial inhabitants of the Americas, Native Americans. So this recent addition to our collection brings to life the story of the Native Americans who they would have encountered, some of their artifacts, and more importantly, also the role that Native Americans played in the cattle industry. Remember, some of the first cattle brought to Texas were for the mission systems, and the original cowboys for those mission systems were the Native Americans who were the population. One of the largest early cattle herds in Texas was actually just north of here in San Antonio and Mission Espada, over 3,000 cattle back in the late 18th century. And so what we see is Native Americans had a vital impact on the cattle industry, and many of the tribes that the cowboys would encounter on their travels through the Indian Territory themselves were involved in the cattle industry in one way or the other. Many of these tribes, they are often called civilized tribes, as they were the ones that the government had most contact with up to that point, had cattle herds of their own, and some of them made their own cattle journeys. And so we are honored to be able to bring that story to life and also show some of the artifacts that these individuals would have used in their own time. As students of history, when we learn about the trail drives in that particular era, we have to talk about the trail drives in the setting of the larger context of the nation during the time of Reconstruction. The end of the Civil War brought untold changes to the nation, and many of those changes were directly focused on the southern states, and Texas was no exception. There was a lot of division within Texas, and this led to some rivalries. This led to some incidents of bloodshed, and unfortunately, the area of DeWitt County and Cuero was the site of multiple of these incidents, and one of the biggest ones, and one that has direct relations to the cattle industry, was the Sutton-Taylor feud, or the Sutton-Taylor War. Began in 1866 and in 1876. This conflict has been mired in a bunch of myths and half-truths, a lot of it drummed up by papers at the time period trying to create sensational stories. And what we try to do here at the Chisholm Trail Heritage Museum is bring to life the true history of this feud, the war, and more importantly, how it relates to the local area, because Cuero was the site of several incidents of bloodshed. One of the big things that involves the Sutton-Taylor feud is cattle. And the initial charge was that the Taylor family, a family with a long history here in Texas, both prior to the event and a group family that's still here today, was that they were rustling cattle. And that certainly, the practice of rustling cattle is certainly an ancient one, and certainly did happen in the state, and it led to a lot of range wars. And this one, it pitted the Taylor family against what was then Deputy Sheriff for the county, that was William Sutton. And we bring to life this event through our displays and through the artifacts that have been passed down from family members and gifted to the museum. One of the most intriguing ones in our collection is actually William Sutton's daybook that he was carrying the day he was assassinated and shot while waiting for a ferry in Indianola. As you make your way to the end of our downstairs exhibit, you'll be presented with an opportunity to not only experience some hands-on activities such as sitting on a genuine Cuero saddle, but also a chance to hear in their own words the stories of those who completed the trails in our Stars Along the Rawhide Trail Theater, where we have truly a cinematic quality video that shows the history of the cattle trail, the trail drives, documents the story of Crockett Caldwell and his drive, and some of the trials that the cowboys faced. While the period of the great cattle drives came to an end before the start of the new century, the importance and role that the cowboy played in the American economy, and more importantly, in the fabric of the nation, is far from over and continues still today. And that is why in our Cowboy Legacies area of the museum, you can learn about the role that cowboys still play today in many communities, including our own. We talk about how the tools of the cowboy that were first brought over by the Spanish all the way back in the 15th century are still used, how saddles are still being made, how spurs are still being made, how many of the cowboys are using this time-honored tradition to today. Here at the Chisholm Trail Heritage Museum, our mission is to preserve the ranching and Western culture of South Texas through our exhibits, our research, and our education programs. We are so involved in the history of the town, of the community, and of the ranching industry. And it seems as though history seeps through every pore. And not only is history seeping through every pore in our exhibit, but also in the building itself. For this building is a historic building. This wall behind me, it was the original outside of the Knights of Pythias Lodge here in Cuero. A little bit of background: the Knights of Pythias were a fraternal order that was set up right towards the end of this war, and its main drive was to promote friendship and unity within the nation. And Cuero petitioned to have a lodge adopted here and chartered here, and it became Jewel Lodge number 103, and it opened in 1903. The upstairs, where we'll be going next, where some of our presentation rooms are, those were the main meeting rooms for the group, while the downstairs served as various different shops for local businesses, everything from a grocer to an automotive store. However, unfortunately, the lodge would eventually dwindle in number and close in the 1980s, and really this building would be left in a rather decaying state. And it wasn't until one of the major individuals involved in the museum, Robert Oliver, came in and helped renovate this building and get it ready to start the Chisholm Trail. We have now moved into the upstairs portion of the museum, and these rooms historically served as the meeting rooms for the Knights of Pythias Lodge. Nowadays, they serve as the event centers and rental rooms for the museum. Many of the items that you see in these rooms are historical relics from the time when this was the Knights of Pythias Lodge. And as I stated earlier, as the lodge shut down due to a lack of membership, many of these items were sold, some of them as far away as out of state, including the stained glass window behind me. And it took the dedicated work of family members of those Knights of Pythias Lodge members to track down these items, going as far as out of state to bring them back and put them in their original home, and now they can reside in what was their home. These rooms also serve as event venues. We have many groups come in from outside, businesses, individuals. They host everything from board meetings to weddings, and to see this room put together for a wedding is something really beautiful and really shows how modern decor can mix with the history. These rooms, aside from an event space, also serve as extra space for special exhibits that the museum has from time to time. We currently have a special exhibit going on called the Art in the Heart of DeWitt County. DeWitt County is actually celebrating our 175th anniversary of the founding of the county. And for this event, they brought together the works of 4 famous artists who hail from this county and have been put up on display for the month. Other exhibits that we've shown in the past include the Smithsonian Waterways, and one that we are particularly proud of, as it was one written up by the museum, was a special exhibit featuring the works of Andy Warhol and various other artists who capture the medium of the American West. CTHM is also proud to be home of several prints from Edward S. Curtis's work. Curtis was a prolific photographer who went throughout the American Southwest and captured amazing and stunning imagery of what was then at that point very much the dying West. He caught pictures of the landscape, of the cultures and the Native Americans. We are happy to have several of these prints in our Edward S. Curtis collection. When CTHM first opened back in 2013, our campus was really limited to just our original building. Since then, we have taken our passion for restoring the past, restoring historic buildings, and we've really expanded our campus. We are currently in the process of expanding our campus further, which we'll go into detail a bit later. But our newest building, and the one I'm incredibly proud to bring to you, is our historic English-German schoolhouse. This building was actually one of the very first schoolhouses, not only in Cuero, but in DeWitt County. I'd like to welcome you all to the inside of the English-German schoolhouse, brought to you by the Chisholm Trail Heritage Museum. Now, this building has a very interesting history. While it was not the first school in either DeWitt County or Cuero, it was one of the first, and it was started in 1877 when a group of German businessmen, Cuero has a very large German population, as did much Texas at the time, they came together and decided to form a English-German school association, and was donated to the group, and construction of the building wouldn't begin until 1880. It was completed in that same year and began as a school for the children of the town residents, many of them either first generation or either immigrants themselves or first generation Americans. This is the school where they would come to learn everything from arithmetic, geography, but most importantly, how to be American citizens and the history of the nation. This building started life as a two-room schoolhouse. The school would begin at 9 in the morning and about 12 or 1 in the afternoon. And this building had many changes over its lifespan. The school didn't last very long before the county stepped in and built their own school. It ended its life in 1894 as a school. It was then purchased by various individuals, and then in 1911, it was turned into a residential home, and it remained that way up until it was purchased by the museum in 2014. Over that time, the museum spent countless hours and resources in renovating it to its original design as a schoolhouse. Currently, we have the building set up so that once one of the rooms is as a classroom would have looked circa 1880. We have original desks that were donated to us from a local church. We use this space as our premier education center. We are dedicated to having children not only come in and learn history, but really live the history. And when they come into this room, they get to sit in these historic desks, and they get to feel the sense of history around them. Our education program originally started out with just doing a summer camp, our cowboy camp, which we dearly love and continue to do to this day, but is expanding to include everything from tours, the special homeschool events, special events. And we also started doing special events for adults who want to learn more about the West, and also targeted on special things. One recent event we had was cowboy cocktails. It wasn't all just beer or whiskey that the Cowboys drank. They drank a lot of champagne and a lot of unique cocktails that guests had a chance to try. This room we use as a classroom. The second half we use as an event space. We're going to head over there now. And we're also going to show you one of the things we've added to help bring history further to life. As an event space, the English Learning Schoolhouse, or as we affectionately call it, EGS, has played host to many events. Everything from small little get-togethers, class reunions, to events hosted by the museum. And we were honored to be awarded in 2021 the Preservation Texas Honor Award for the restoration of this building. One of the things that we did is we had an add-on made to help facilitate education, and that was the addition of a kitchen. This kitchen allows us to show the different techniques used throughout the history of this region and the preparations of the foods, and more importantly, what were the foods that were eaten at the time. We've also been able to use this to do programming regarding canning and pickling for preservative purposes, and this allows students to come in and not only see the history and experience the history, but taste the history. Looking back at EGS, our community gardens, we have partnered with local groups to help bring these gardens to life. We filled them with both crops that were available at the time and a lot of local flora, the flowers you see here. And we partnered with these outside groups to be able to allow individuals from the community to come in and pick anything in this garden. This is free to use for the community. It provides a source for fresh produce for many of our residents. And it allows us to teach young students coming in, and really students of any age, about the food that was consumed at the time and how it was prepared. Behind me, we also have two additional rooms that show the transportation that was used by certain students if they were lucky enough to get transportation in the form of a horse and buggy and a wagon. Located just behind me is truly an exquisite building and a beautiful representation of late 19th century architecture. It is our historic Proctor Green home. This building is built in the Queen Anne style and is one of the many historic buildings that has been renovated here in Cuero. When the museum acquired this building, it was from generous benefactor, Robert L. Oliver. And since the museum has acquired this building, it has served as a guest house. Guests are welcome to come and stay here, rent the building for a night or two. We've also used it for events. Many weddings and receptions have been held here. What this does is allow guests to experience what a well-to-do home of the late 19th century would have been like. Head inside, see some of those features, and learn a little bit more about the history of this building. The Proctor Greenhouse, this marvelous example of the Queen Anne design, was built in 1892, and the founder of this, really the Proctor family, who still remained a force in Cuero, was David C. Proctor, who was a lawyer who originally operated out of Indianola, had been in the Confederate Army during the Civil War. After Indianola was destroyed in the hurricane, one of the hurricanes that happened, the family moved inland to Cuero. They set up and they built this home. And David C. Proctor served many years as a lawyer in this county. He was also president of the bar for Cuero, and he was described as a man of unimpeachable character. Now, this absolutely gorgeous 3-bedroom, 3-bath guest house allows guests the chance to see what it was like to live in a house of means during the late 19th century. Whether you want to just walk in and experience the room, or descend down the beautiful staircase, a favorite of many brides, host an elegant meal that'll be the talk of all your friends. Or perhaps you prefer to spend an evening relaxing in the quiet of the parlor with stimulating conversation among friends. We are now back inside the main museum building. And as you saw, over time, our museum campus has grown considerably. We've added additional buildings. And while I can't give too much away right now, we are looking at an addition in the very near future. We've been able to acquire the historic building next door, the Trapwine building. And that will soon host a massive, one of the largest expansions of our collection. We'll also be able to close the street, and we'll be putting in walkway there. And I encourage you to stay tuned and see how this new major expansion is going to go.
All right, thank you so much. I hope you all enjoyed the video. That is just a brief tour of the Chisholm Trail Heritage Museum. And again, one of the things we really are focused on, and what we try to bring to any students who come in, and remember this is students of any age, is we're trying to teach about how impactful the trail system was, both on the macro level for the nation and the micro level for the towns. We really want to stress just how transformative these trails were for wherever they touched. And luckily, through the love that we have with the community, both that we have for them and they have for us, we've been able to expand our vision. We've been able to add so many additional options for people to come in. And one of the things we really strive is to make education fun and reach out to people who might not be traditionally interested in either cattle drives or cowboys. As I know, as hard as that is to believe that there are people out there who don't want to learn the history of the cowboys, what we do is we help them find something that they like about that history and teach it further. So again, thank you so much for letting us present to you today. We greatly appreciate it, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Bryan, thank you. That was absolutely outstanding. I have another thing on my bucket list now. I want to see the Chisholm Trail Heritage Museum in Cuero. I saw you on one of those scenes on an old saddle. I'm glad you didn't get thrown off that particular prong.
Yes.
Good riding there. I'm going to open up the floor, see if there are questions. Is that Sharon Weber who's joining us on Zoom? Great to have you. Well, here's a question. When can we have our annual Chisholm Trail Conference in Cuero? That sounds like a great idea.
Well, we would certainly love to have all of you visit, and anytime you pass through Texas or Cuero, please know you will always be guests of the Chisholm Trail Heritage Museum. Come by, we'll set you up, we'll treat you right and show you the town and everything we have to offer.
Good morning, Ron. Yes, we would love to have you come, and thank you. It's been such an honor to be on this today. We've really enjoyed it, so thank you.
We've thoroughly enjoyed it here. Cuero is located in the Guadalupe Valley. Tell us a little bit more about your location. I know it's South Texas. How far from the coast, or where is Cuero?
Well, it's a great location. We're about 90 miles from San Antonio, Austin, Corpus, and about 2 hours from Houston. So South Central Texas. So come visit.
Yes, and very close to the coast.
Very good.
That's an hour and a half from the coast.
See if there are other questions folks have. Bryan, before we got started, I commented about your hat, in particular that pin on your hat. Would you tell us about that?
Yes, definitely. So I always try to, whenever I give a tour, and honestly, some days when I just show up to the museum, I'm in historic clothing. It helps guests, really see the history and feel it. The hat I'm wearing, the badge, is a badge for the Grand Army of the Republic, which was the Union's veterans organization set up at the end of the war. And this pin is very special to me because this one actually belonged to one of my ancestors who fought in the Civil War. My third great grandfather, George Wilmer McCartney, served with the 62nd Pennsylvania with the Army of the Potomac throughout the war. At the end of the war, he moved to Wisconsin, and he was a member of one of the Grand Army of the Republic lodges there. Now, a question I often get from people is, well, you're in Texas, why are you wearing a GAR hat pin? And what I like to always remind people is, remember at the end of the war, people moved everywhere. Many of the cowboys who were part of the trail were Civil War veterans, and that helped shape who they were as individuals. And there was actually a Grand Army of the Republic lodge not too far from Cuero, located in Victoria, Texas, about 30 minutes from us. And one of the members of that lodge was right here in Cuero. So there were Grand Army of the Republic ties.
Well, that's a treasure. Lots of compliments in the chat for your presentation, Bryan. Really outstanding. Question about the saddle collection. Were there some of those that used to be at University of Texas? Do you know? Tell us about the saddles you have there.
Yes, definitely. So many of the saddles in our collection are part of our Tinker collection. The one that I showed at the beginning of the video, which documents the Cowboys of the Americas. And those are on permanent loan from the University of Texas. So we actually only have a fraction of those saddles on display. There are so many. And we're actually currently working on putting together a exhibit a temporary exhibit to be able to showcase more of those saddles and bring them out.
Other questions? What are the museum hours? When are you open?
Yes, definitely. So we are open 10 to 4, Tuesday through Saturday. Sharon, anything you want to add on?
No,
museum hours?
we
Okay.
welcome all of you to come.
Yes, and of course, then when you visit, we're right in the heart of Cuero. It's not a large town, so we're not hard to find. We're right on the main street. But when you come to Cuero, you're coming into a town with just tremendous history. The town has done such a great job to really help revitalize the downtown area, restore it to its historic past. As I mentioned in the video, the county just celebrated its 175th anniversary, and there was a big to do downtown where they had many historic displays and people celebrating the history that we have.
Outstanding. And yeah, people in the chat are interested in the saddle exhibit. Let's see, Tom, do you have a question?
Yeah, this is a really interesting and fascinating presentation, and it raises a question for me as to, I didn't realize that there were more than 2 museums focused on the Chisholm Trail. So I guess my question is, how many museums across Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas, how many Chisholm Trail museums are there?
Quite a few, and I'm sure as the history gets more out there, we're going to see more in the future. In Texas, I know of at least 4, including us.
It's an interesting question, and what we found is that there's a wealth of information up and down the trail, and so many references to the Chisholm Trail, and so many places where it's also been incorporated into county museums and local historical interpretations too. So,
Tom, you need to come and we'll make a big old long road trip from all the way from Abilene all the way down to through Texas.
I have already actually starting to develop a file of the roads, the highways that paralleled or coincide with the Chisholm Trail and the towns that are along it. Yeah, I now have on my list of things to do, and a fairly high priority is to come out and visit you, and then work my way actually from Abilene all the way down to, well, now it's Cuero at least.
I'm sure Mary Lou and I could grab you in Abilene and take you all the way to the border in Oklahoma, and then somebody could pick you up there and take you on to Oklahoma, and then these guys can pick you up in Texas and take you on down.
Right, we'll pull out the red carpet for you.
We probably want to go too.
and I'm interested in putting together a list of all the celebrations that take place across the year, and find out if they have if they present musical venues.
right.
So I could potentially
You could be gone for months.
do a performing road trip.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the National Historic Trail designation would provide some support from the National Park Service to recognize these communities, these attractions, and enable us to do some unified marketing for these various groups. So, and looks like we have volunteers in the chat to help your road trip, and we all look forward to that. Folks, how about a big round of applause, virtual or in person, for Bryan Gonzalez, Sharon Weber, and the great folks at the Chisholm Trail Heritage Museum. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
It's time to hear about our speaker for next month. And so we're going to call on our Cattle Trail Showcase Chair, Lonnie Stephen. Lonnie?
Thank you, Ron. This presentation and then Tom's remarks really exemplify what the whole purpose of this Cattle Trails Showcase is to share the wealth of information that we have that I don't know how we're going to ever address if we get the designation, which towns get the signage and everything else. But I was just thinking when Tom, there's probably 12 museums between Abilene and the Kansas line that have Chisholm Trail exhibits that I know of just in Kansas. That I know there's a wealth of them in Oklahoma and unlimited number in Texas. So, Tom, that's an interesting question. It may take a while to figure out the answer to that one. So, but we appreciate everybody being on today. And actually, my name isn't Karen. I retired Friday, and I'm using my wife's computer, and I've got to get this all arranged. But I did get Zoom on in time. So, next month we are working and have a tentative agreement. The presenter was actually out this week, so we couldn't get confirmed. But we're going to be going to Boot Hill, the queen of the cattle towns, Dodge City, and we'll invite some of our Western Trail friends along in with the presentations next week. And Ron, I think you were just out there, weren't you, this last week?
I was. I just visited the brand new, new to me, Boot Hill Museum Visitor Center, a multi-million-dollar attraction investment in the community. So we're excited to learn more about that on next month's showcase.
And then I think in December, I haven't confirmed this yet, but we're going to try to put a little Christmas parade theme with our December presentation. So we all want to watch for that. I believe it'll be in Oklahoma and probably if we can get it worked out in Duncan. So thank you all for joining. And Ron, you go ahead and close.
Well, thanks so much, Lonnie. So one quick reminder, join us next Friday for the annual Chisholm Trail Conference in person or on Zoom. Go to chisholmtrailassn.com to follow the link to get registered. And then join us on Friday, November 12 at 10 a.m. again, Central Time, for our next Cattle Trail Showcase. To close our program today, this is Ron Wilson, Poet Laureate, saying thanks for taking time to join us in this place. And come on back next month for our Cattle Trails Showcase. Happy trails, everybody.
Nancy, will the Zoom link for the conference next week be sent out?
Yes, I will wait and probably about Wednesday and send that out as a group text to let everybody know what the Zoom is.
Okay. And the schedule, I mean, the kind of what's going on the program?
That will go out as well at the same time.
And it's posted on that same website as well.
Good, good.
Thanks, everybody.
Nancy, this is Carol.